venturing into a very sensitive topic. It's sensitive on a lot of levels. First of all, on the political level, people are very passionate about it, whether they're for it or against it. Also, people may have experienced it in their own life. And what we're discussing, of course, is abortion. So what I want to say is that the purpose of this class is not to dictate to the United States government or the United States judicial system of how they should deal with abortion, whether it should be legal or not legal, because that's based all on secular law. But I think what we need to do is to bring it out. What does Judaism have to say about this? Now, we need to remember that abortion is not an invention of the 20th or the 21st century. Abortion has been around as long as babies have been born. And we find some allusions to it in the Torah as well. What's quite interesting is that you find very little about it in the Talmud. And one of the reasons is because Judaism always cherished life. And since they cherished life, abortion wasn't on the agenda. But we still need to know how Judaism sees it. A lot of people have grappled with this issue. I will tell you a personal story. Going back in the 80s, there was a group, pro-life. See, when we talk about pro-life and pro-choice, which we're going to change that whole description tonight, pro-life usually means the people that are against abortion, so that they believe that the fetus is alive. It is a life, and therefore it needs to be protected. Pro-choice means that it's part of the woman's body, and the woman can make any choice that she wants. So the pro-life movement in North Carolina was planning a major protest at a place that near Dilworth called Holocaust Square. Holocaust Square is where Temple Israel used to be located before everything moved over to Shalom Park. And what they were trying to say is that permitting abortion is similar to having a Holocaust on babies that were not born yet. And of course, this became very controversial. A lot of Jewish figures spoke out against it. So somebody told them that I'm an Orthodox rabbi, so therefore I'm probably going to be in their camp. So they interviewed me live on a radio without prep. And the interview lasted maybe about 90 seconds. So the question is, why did the interview last 90 seconds? And what was the gist of my answer? So we're going to discuss this tonight as well. And the reason that this question is there is because by examining the question here, can a mother risk her own life for the sake of saving her unborn child? It forces us to really examine what is the Torah perspective on abortion. And we're going to see some interesting things here that the Torah, as I mentioned earlier, does not explicitly talk about abortion. It seems this never came up as a question in rabbinic discussion. It never came up as an issue that the rabbis had to debate, and therefore you don't find it. That must be that it wasn't even something that Jewish people entertained. In modern times, with the medicine making it available, and it even becoming legal, it has become a very, very big issue. And for that reason, it presents itself to the rabbis. However, the case that we just saw unfold, that could have happened in the past. So there must be halakhic guidance in that case that if the baby is endangering, the fetus, I should say, is endangering the life of the mother, does the mother have the right to choose not to abort? No one questions whether she has the right to abort, as we'll soon see, because her life takes precedence. But the question is, does she have the right to avoid an abortion? I'll give you a spoiler, because since the shtisel is fiction, so they didn't want to make it overly dramatic. So she didn't agree, and it was happy ever after. It happened, actually, my father told me a story that there was a case like that came before the Rebbe, but it wasn't a halachic question. It was a question, how do we go about, what do we do? How do we think about this? And the Rebbe said, let everything go, everything will be fine. He gave a blessing and everything was fine. Here we're talking about from the halachic perspective. So in order to get to this, let's open up to, well, there's a lot of stuff here, but we're going to get, I'm not going to spend time on all the Talmudic pieces. We're going to get to page 98. We call this Talmudic embryology. Now, this passage of Talmud appears in several places in the Talmud. It appears in Bava Metzia. If you would look at student page 96 in your own book, you will see a lot of that with a lot of commentary. That's for your own reading. But we're now going to go to a text the way it appears in the last tractate of the Talmud called Nida. So let's look inside and then we'll go over what it says on the slide. So this whole discussion is sort of like what we call the Agadata part. In other words, it's the storytelling, it's the narrative. It's not speaking about halacha. The Talmud would sometimes engage in some sort of discussions which were not halachically based, but trying to illustrate to you something which was much deeper. And this is one of those examples where it talks about the fetus and what happens to the fetus before it's born, according to the mystical aspect of Torah. So this is text 1. A fetus inside its mother's womb resembles a folded writing tablet. We're going to go through everything as we finish it. Its 2 hands rest on its temples. Its 2 elbows rest on its knees. Its heels rest against its buttocks, and its head lies between its knees. The mouth is closed, and its navel is open. It eats what its mother eats, drinks what its mother drinks, and produces no excrement. And by the way, anyone that deals with prenatal kind of issues will tell you that when a baby is in distress, they do actually produce, and that's usually called meconium. This is just a little footnote. One of our children had that, and they called in the team to do a suction. And that was a sign that the baby is in distress, but usually healthy babies don't have that problem, so therefore that is what the Talmud is saying. Okay. We're soon going to discuss a little bit why the Talmud describes it in such a way. A lamp burns above his head and sees from one end to the world to the other. In other words, that the fetus can see from one end of the world to the other end. What is this all about? The fetus is taught the entire Torah. However, as the fetus emerges into the world, an angel approaches and strikes its mouth, causing it to forget the entire Torah. The fetus does not emerge before it is made to take an oath. What is the content of the oath? In Hebrew, it says, Tehei tzadik v'al tehi rasha. Be righteous and do not be wicked. So why are we telling you this story? So we're going to go through it a little bit. First of all, before we go to the second part about the lamb, the baby is in a circle because the baby is experiencing the infinite light of Hashem. And infinite is not described in a line. A line has a top, and has a bottom, and has a middle. A circle represents infinity, and that's why the head and the knees are all on the same level. The other thing is that it doesn't have any independence because it eats whatever its mother eats. It breathes through its mother. So it doesn't have any entity of its own as an independent being. As we will soon see, that is the reason why we celebrate birthdays, not conception days, because birth is what gives the person independence. But what does it mean that a lamp burns above its head? So let's look at the board. So it's number 1, a lamp burns above its head. Obviously, it's not a physical lamp. It's a divine spiritual lamp. The fetus is taught the entire Torah. The fetus does not emerge before it's made to take an oath. Okay. The lamp refers to the neshama, the soul. We find in Mishlei, in the book of Proverbs, that it says, Ner Hashem nishmat Adam. The candle of God is the soul of the human being. So a candle, which is like a lamp, which this is what, it doesn't actually say the word lamp. If you look at the Hebrew part of the text, it says vener. A ner we translate as a lamp or a candle, but it's the same term that we find in Proverbs, that a candle or a lamp is likened to the neshama. So it means the neshama already has an association with the fetus. However, it's not in it. We'll soon see it's above it, because it doesn't integrate until the birth. The fetus is taught the entire Torah. Why is that? The fetus is prepared for living a productive spiritual life outside the womb. This is a very fascinating piece of the Talmud. Actually, the famous book Tanya, that is written by Rav Shneur Zalman of Eladi, which is called the Bible of Hasidic philosophy, starts that with that part of this Talmud that says, and that's why it's called Tanya. It says, Tanya, we have learned at the end of the third chapter of Nida that a soul, before it enters into the world, mashbi'anoi, so they make him take an oath to eat tzaddik v'al tirasha. Be righteous and don't be wicked. Why is that? It's that the reason for that is because it enables the soul to withstand the challenge of the body. The body is interested in materialism and in physical and in all kinds of delights that the material world gives it. The soul is interested in spirituality and godliness. So they'll have a clash and the body will dominate the soul. But by making that oath, and we'll also see soon that the word mashbia, which is the word for taking an oath, can also be read as masbia, with the same shin as a sin, right? Masbia means to satiate. In fact, if you ever fly El Al and you order a meal, it'll say this meal was prepared by a company called Masbia, because they hope you will be satiated with airline food. But anyways, it's sort of like a misnomer, but nevertheless, they call it Masbia. But the idea is that Masbia means that the soul is satiated. It's infused with an energy that it should be able to stand up to what it needs. And that's the meaning that is taught the entire Torah. But when the fetus comes out, what were you going to say?
Question. So doesn't it contradict itself if the neshama is still above and not within, but the fetus has learned already the entire Torah, which would make it holy?
But then what happens is when it says that when the fetus emerges in the world, the angel approaches and strikes it in the mouth, causing it to forget. Why is that? So what it really means, it's a metaphor. The angel actually forces the soul into the body because the soul doesn't want to go into the body. Soul wants to remain with God. You know, sometimes when you tighten a seatbelt, how do you know that the seatbelt is on? When you hear it snap, right? The buckle is in. When you put together a unit and you want to know if it's really in, you have to hear it snap. That's what the angel is doing to strike it on the mouth, is it pushes in the soul, so to speak, in, and it snaps in. And what happens at that moment is as soon as the soul goes into the body, it's totally discombobulated, it's overwhelmed by the body, and it forgets everything that it learned. However, when it studies it, it's nothing new. Give you an example. Let's say you were in a different country and you learned a different language, you learned their culture. And then you left it and you were gone for 20, 30 years. And you forgot it. You didn't use that language. You didn't use that culture. But when you come back to it, all of a sudden things start coming back to you. It's not a foreign thing because there is a feeling, yeah, this is something that I was steeped in. It was something that was part of me. And that is what the Talmud is trying to say, that the Torah is really part of the soul and it's part of the experience. So therefore, it's already there. And the next thing is that they make the oath. So there's two things about the oath. An oath, why is it an oath? So he says a fetus is granted all the tools necessary for it to live righteously. An oath is different than anything else. An oath is even more than a promise. An oath is almost like a covenant. In the Torah, you can make a promise and you can break the promise. But when you make an oath, the oath binds you, and you can only undo the oath if you nullify it in front of a court. And they will have to know why and what the circumstances are that you should be allowed to annul the oath. So the oath is binding. We find the same story when Jacob passed away. He made Joseph take an oath that he would take him and bury him in Hebron, right? So all the commentaries ask, why did he say an oath? He should have just said, that's my request. And Joseph, as the viceroy, would have certainly done it. So the commentaries explain that the Egyptians wanted to keep Jacob in their midst because they saw him as a holy man. They also didn't want Joseph to leave and that there should be a whole parade going to the land of Canaan. But when Joseph told Pharaoh, listen, it's not a promise, it's the oath, then Pharaoh said, I can't go against an oath. So an oath is binding. So this is one meaning. And the other meaning of the oath is that it satiates the soul. Okay, so what do we learn from this? Let's look at the meaning of it. One thing is very important because it says the lamp burns above its head. What does it mean above its head? It hasn't been yet integrated. It hasn't entered into the body. So the soul and the body is still separate. What does that mean? Does it mean that the fetus is already a living entity, or it's not a living entity? Furthermore, by the fact that it says that it is totally dependent on its mother, and it doesn't eat through its mouth, but through its navel, means to say that it's still part of its mother's body. It's not something that it's on its own. So it's one thing that we learn from this Talmudic story. Okay. Yeah.
But it seems to say that until birth, there is no soul.
Until birth, there's a soul, but the soul has not entered into the body, and it's there,
Right.
hovers around the body, and it has some connection, but it hasn't entered in. The time of in Judaism, this is one of the proofs that the soul enters the body at the time of birth.
So,
1 second.
so
I'll
at
take
the
it.
time of birth. So if Judaism doesn't look at the fetus as a whole person until birth.
Well, I'll repeat it for the benefit of those that are listening online. Judaism doesn't consider the fetus a full person until birth. That will emerge, because remember, when we study halacha and we're trying to build a case, we never look at one source. We look at a compilation of sources, and then it gives us the full picture. And that's what's going to happen tonight. You're going to have the full picture.
Two questions. Is it a fresh soul, or is it a soul that's going to be assigned to the previous life?
So that you're asking, it's a fresh soul or is it reassigned? That goes into the whole discussion of reincarnation, which we actually did a JLI course. The answer is that every soul that enters into the body can either be a brand new soul or at least partially new. But it's even those souls that are reincarnated, the certain spiritual components are reincarnated, but the essence of the soul is a new soul that was designated for this body. So this is not the time to discuss it. We had a separate discussion. It's very difficult to understand recycling, reincarnation, as we usually associate it with recycling, but it's not about recycling. So a soul is of a different kind of character. I'll give you one, for instance. A soul is like a candle, we said before. Now, when you light one candle from another candle, so the second candle, it originated in the first candle, and it has characteristics of the first candle. But did the first candle get diminished at all? Not at all. Does the second candle develop something of its own? Absolutely yes. Does it have something from before? Yes. And we have to understand that the soul reincarnation, works in that same vein. But it's a very long topic, which we already did, and we'll probably redo it again, so I don't want to do it right now. Okay. The fetus is taught the entire Torah. What does this mean? The fetus doesn't have the ability to do anything on its own. Remember, it's not dependent. It's not independent. So even the Torah that's given to it is fed to it, but it's not something that it's discovered on its own. The Torah that we have is not fed to us. The Torah that we have, that we're studying, it was given to us, but we, in order for us to be able to understand it, we have to work on it. We have to open up our mind, and we have to examine it and study it and explain it until it becomes part of us. So in a sense, over here, it doesn't mean that the fetus is a self-made Torah scholar. It's just that it's injected and infused with the divine spiritual power, but it's not independent. Oops. And the thing before is that it doesn't emerge before it's made to take the oath, is because it doesn't even have the stamina to be able to withstand the world. So one thing that we learn over here is that the fetal status is pre-birth. It's not yet an independent person. And that's why in Judaism, there's so much joy in birth, because the main breakthrough with the birth of a child is independence. The soul all of a sudden is infused within the body, and they become a person. Yeah, they're still dependent on their mother. They still need someone to feed them. Nevertheless, compared to the state that they were prior to birth, they are now independent. And that's really what a birthday is. Not only that, even in secular law, when we talk about a day of independence, we call it the birthday of the country. July 4th is called the birthday of the United States of America, even though we lived here before, we had sets of laws, but we weren't independent. We were swallowed up by the British. We had to have their laws. They dictated to us what we have to do, and we didn't have independence. When July 4th came, even though there's a big question which day the Declaration was written, but was it the final? But anyways, everybody settled on July 4th. But it's the concept that July 4th gave us the independence. The same thing is true with Jewish people. What holiday is considered to be the birthday of the Jewish people? No. What holiday is considered to be the birthday of the Jewish people? What'd you say? Did someone say? Passover, Pesach. And in fact, in the Haggadah, we quote from the book of Yecheskel, that God descended upon the Jews, lokachat lo gol mikerev gol, to take a nation from within a nation. So the Medrash says that the Jews, the Israelites in Egypt, were like an unborn fetus that was totally dependent on the Egyptians. And when they came out and got independence, that was the birthday. So the birthday of the Jewish people was on Pesach. So this is why the birthday is so important. So we're already getting a sense that even though the soul is associated with the fetus, there is a major investment in this fetus because the Torah is taught to this fetus, but yet it hasn't yet gained the status of a full human life, right? So that's the philosophy. Now we're going to start building the case. So that was just the introduction. So there is some life, but it's not independent life. It's not considered to be yet a complete human being. So now we're going to go and look in the law in regards to how the Torah treats a fetus. So this is a study of two laws. We're going to start with the first one. This is one of the most famous verses quoted in those that are anti-abortion. Okay, I'm telling you right now, this tells us anti-abortion, but we're soon going to see how it plays itself out. So please turn to page 100, look at text 2. This is a story which is common, men fighting, right? Okay, if men are embroiled in an altercation and they're trying to hit each other, and one of the men, instead of hitting his opponent, hits a pregnant woman that was standing right there. And her fetuses, it could be one or two, emerge, and there is no tragedy. This is the exact words. The perpetrator must certainly be punished through providing restitution in accordance with the judge's orders. Restitution is financial restitution. If, however, there is a tragedy, you must provide a life for a life. It says that when someone kills another person, you take a life for a life. If somebody injures another person, there's monetary. But if you kill someone, then the killer's life is forfeited. So please turn to 101. Let's look at the exercises here. Question number 1. What is the meaning of the phrases "and her fetuses emerge and there's no tragedy"? The fetuses mean to say could be their twins, could be their triplets. Some say fetuses mean that by killing, if it's talking about killing the child, the baby, then it prevents future fetuses, whatever, but that's not the point right now. And there's no tragedy. What does it mean? The fetus and the mother survive? Or does it mean the mother survives, but the fetus dies? The perpetrator must certainly be punished through providing restitution. What is the basis of this restitution? A, provoking a premature but healthy birth, causing the death of the fetus. Now, the A in both are in line because they're both the same interpretation. What is the meaning of the phrase, "is there a tragedy, you must provide a life for a life"? If the fetuses die, the assailant receives the death penalty. If the mother dies, the assailant receives the death penalty. Very interesting. We're going to look at both options. We're going to call it option A and option B. We're not going to tell you which is the real one, but here's option A. Option A, if the fetuses were lost, their attacker would be liable for a death penalty. According to that opinion, abortion is regular murder and the fetus is a regular human life. And for that reason, if that happens, the assailant is killed. Option B, the fetus, human life. If the fetuses were lost, the attacker would not be liable for the death penalty. All they would have to do is pay financial restitution. Now, we all know that the Torah, the written Torah, was given as a code. And you could never rule from the written Torah without the narrative that was given by Moshe. And this is one of the examples. Moshe taught us that the correct interpretation is option B, is the second one. And it means like this. If there was no tragedy, means that the woman did not die, but the baby did die. Then there's a financial penalty.
Well, they grown up.
Yes. Let me just finish. Can I just finish this and then I'll let you ask the question because I'm in the middle of a thought. So the meaning is, according to Judaism, that if the baby died, since the baby is not a full human being, but there is damage, there is pain, so the assailant has to pay a fine. However, if there's a tragedy that the mother died, then it's considered murder. That's the Jewish viewpoint. The Christians, or many of the Christians, actually don't accept option B and they accept option A. And that's why they are vehemently against abortion, saying that abortion is regular murder. And when it says if there's a tragedy, then you have to forfeit is when the babies die. When there's no tragedy, then there is a financial penalty. I don't know for what, maybe because they were hurt or the woman was hurt. So that's where we are right now. Yes, Ken, now you can go ask your question.
So who is the attacker in modern day parlance? Is it the doctor? Is it the mother? Who is
No.
it?
It starts in the beginning of the verse. Two men are embroiled in a fight. That's what it says. And one is beating up the other person. And obviously, we're talking about that one of the men has his wife there, and she tries to stop the fight. And he hits her because he's upset that she intervened. So he blows her, he hits her, and with that it caused her to abort, according to the Jewish viewpoint. If there was a tragedy, if there was no tragedy, but she still lost her pregnancy, she was forced to abort, then he has to pay a fine.
But
So
Rabbi
according,
Gunnar, I understand what the Talmud says, but isn't this situation rather rare in connection with how abortions really happen?
I don't understand your question.
Or in other words, this talks about two men fighting each other and one man accidentally.
I don't know if it was, I didn't say it was accidentally. We don't say it's accidentally, and I'll tell you why we don't say it's accidentally. Because if it was accidentally, even if the woman died, he doesn't get the death penalty. The death penalty is only if a person wantonly kills another person or strikes them in such a way that they can die. And there's someone warning them that if you do this, the person may die, and they still do that. So if it was an accident, the Torah would never say that you take a life, whether you say that the fetus is a life or it's not. The Torah speaks in sometimes terms that it might be very rare because it's trying to teach a lesson here. It's trying to teach us something. And it was quite common that men would fight with each other. And it was quite common that one of the wives wanted to stop. It's not the only place. There's another verse which says the opposite, where the wife was aggressive towards the assailant. But I'm not going to go into that. So that's not the issue. The issue is that the Torah is presenting it in a particular way. And what's important to us is that the Jewish view, unlike the Christian view, is that the fetus is not considered to be a full-term life. So for that reason, it's not considered murder. And it's not the final statement. This is just the beginning. We're going to get into it a little deeper. Yes.
During the fight, the baby's born, it survives, is born with a lot of injuries. Who's responsible for the baby? He's born alive, but injured and needs constant care.
The attacker is liable for that. That's not even a question.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to go on now. Fetus does not equal human life. Okay, that's one text. Now we're going to go to another text. Text number 3 on page 102. This is taken from a different part of the Talmud. It says, if on Shabbat, a woman is sitting on the birth stool. The birth stool means basically that she's in the maternity ward, she's about to give birth, and she dies before she was able to deliver the child. They should fetch a knife and cut open her womb and extract the child. The Talmud objects, but that statement is obvious. There's no prohibition against cutting flesh on Shabbat. What are they trying to say here? So Rabbah responded, the statement is necessary to permit the fetching of a knife by way of a public thoroughfare, which is prohibited on Shabbat. One of the violations on Shabbat is that one is not permitted to take and carry something from one domain to another domain, especially from a public domain into a private domain, or even a private domain crossing a public domain and going into a domain. That's called a prohibition against carrying, because that's how they were constructing the temple. The tractate Talmud of Shabbat starts with that and speaks about the idea of carrying. So what happens if they didn't have the surgical equipment there to be able to do the operation, because they were just going to deliver a baby? They weren't going to do surgery, and they're going to deliver a baby. It doesn't have to, this is before C-sections. In the olden days, C-section equated death to the mother. They didn't have the knowledge that they have today. So what happens if you need to bring the equipment? And the only way to bring the equipment is to violate the Shabbat. But it's not only about equipment, it's anything that you need to do. It's like driving the patient to the hospital, whatever it is that you're allowed to do it. Why? Obviously, it's to save a life. Because when it comes to saving a life, we're obligated to violate Shabbat to save a life, including to save a fetus. Which means to say that the fetus does have a form of life that we're going to violate the Shabbat for it. We learned a little bit about it in the last class as well. Shabbat is so holy that we can't violate it unless it comes to saving a life. And over here, we're saying that it's a life. Okay, so what do we learn from this? It's a little bit different than what we learned before. Before we learned from the verse, and according to the Jewish interpretation, that if somebody causes an abortion by fighting with this other guy, and the guy hits the woman, that there's no death penalty. But on the other hand, so that means that it's not full life. But over here, we're saying that Shabbat is dispensed with in order to save a life. And the only time you can do it is not to save a potential life, but to save a life. So it seems a little contradictory, right? Let's give a look further. This one speaks about abortion. This is one of the cases where there is abortion. This is the Mishnah in Ola, text 4, page 103. If a woman experiences a life-threatening difficulties during labor, we cut the fetus in her womb and extract it limb by limb because her life takes precedence over the fetus's life. Obviously, if they were able to do a C-section, they would do that. But remember, I said those days they didn't yet have the knowledge and technology of how to do the C-section. But what does it mean? This is already touching on the case that we saw in the video before, right? If the mother's life is in danger by continuing the pregnancy or the birth, this is not that the baby didn't emerge yet. It's a totally different law if the baby emerges. The baby didn't emerge yet. It's still dependent. It's not a full-term life. So then whose life takes precedence? The mother's life. Now, that's not so simple. Let's give a look in text 5, 104. This is, by the way, how you discuss Talmudic law and how you build a case. It's text 5 on page 104. Rashi. Rashi is the famous commentator that all of us go by, that he comments on Torah, and he brings it out in a very straightforward way. So he says, a midwife reaches into the womb with her hand to dismember the fetus and extract limb by limb. For as long as a fetus has not emerged into the world, it is not a life. It is therefore permitted to kill it for the sake of saving the mother's life. Now, Rashi is very careful with his wording here. On the one hand, he said it's not a life, and that's why you're permitted to dismember it. But on the other hand, only in the case of saving the mother, not at will. So we learn from here that abortion in Judaism is prohibited. That's no question that abortion is prohibited. However, there are exceptions to the rule. Murder, there's no exception to the rule. You can't murder. We learned it last week, according to some opinions, when it comes to end a life, you cannot pull the plug because it's considered murder. So murder, there's no way out. So Rashi doesn't consider it murder, even it considers it illegal that you're not allowed to do an abortion at will. But since it's not considered murder, and the life is not a full life, the mother's life takes precedence. Yeah, we look in the Rambam, Maimonides, when he's describing in the Mishnah Torah, he comes from a totally different perspective. He agrees with the halacha because nobody argues with the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that you're allowed to do it, so you're allowed to do it. But he doesn't go with Rashi's reason. He goes with a totally different reason. And he introduces a concept which is very well known in halacha. The concept is called rodef. Let's talk about it, which means pursuer. Page 105, we are commanded not to take pity on the life of a rodef, which means a murderous pursuer, if that is necessary to rescue the intended victim. Let me explain this. When someone is suddenly in danger by another person, willfully or not, the person that's endangering someone else forfeits their safety because they're endangering someone else. The classic case is you see Mr. A running and Mr. B is chasing him with a weapon and saying, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to kill you. And you see that he's shooting at him, or he's going with a machete or with a knife, and aiming for him and he's missing him, but he's going. What's your responsibility if you're a bystander? You can't just say, I'm going to look the other way. According to Judaism, it says, do not stand by the blood of your friend. You need to intervene. Now, let's say you have a weapon. Are you allowed to use the weapon? Not only are you allowed to use the weapon, you must use the weapon, but you must first try to incapacitate the person by wounding the person, by wounding the aggressor, the assailant, not by killing them. However, if the only way to stop the aggressor is by killing them, then you have the right to kill them. Not only the right, you have the obligation to kill them. That's the law of Rodef. It's a very interesting law. Because when one is in the position of trying to kill others, then, it could even be that if you're seeing a drunk driver that's driving down the road and they're about to crash into people, and the only way to stop it is by shooting out the tires, which will kill the drunk driver, you have an obligation to do that in order to save everybody else. That's what Jewish law says. It's very interesting. Over here, the fetus becomes the rodef. Not willfully, but they are the rodef. And you're not allowed to have pity on a rodef. On this basis, our sages ruled that if a woman experiences life-threatening complications during labor, it is permitted to abort the fetus in her womb with drugs or with an instrument, for the fetus is considered a form of rodef against its mother. Now, even though they both say the same thing, but when you look at their reasoning, there's a world of difference between the two. Let's give a look on the board. Rashi says the reason why you're allowed to do it is because the fetus in the womb is not alive. Maimonides doesn't mention anything about the life status of the fetus. He says because it's a rodef. The difference is Maimonides says the fetus is a rodef, and Rashi doesn't mention anything about rodef. Now, this has led to two schools of thought in how we deal with abortion. So first we have to ask the question, why does the mother's life override that of the fetus? Rashi says the fetus is not yet alive. Maimonides says because of the rodef. Okay, now if you take it to the next step, according to Rashi, taking the life of the fetus is not allowed, but you're allowed to in such a situation, but it's not considered as if you've taken a life. Period. Rambam doesn't agree with Rashi. And Rambam that says it's not just, now why would Rashi say, and why does Judaism say that abortion is prohibited? Because you're taking a potential life. The life is already about to be there. The soul is already bonding with the body. It's a fetus. It's something that has a good potential, and you're not allowed to destroy the potential. That's why it's considered to be a major crime. For that reason, by the way, and it's a sensitive topic, but according to Judaism, men are not permitted to masturbate unless it's for health reasons, because it's killing a potential seed. So it's maybe not as strict as abortion, but it is considered to be very high up there. If you look in the Encyclopedia Talmudic, it's because the destruction of seed is considered to be something very, very, very serious. So therefore, it makes sense that abortion is prohibited. But the Rambam, even though he says it's not a full human life and there's no death penalty, but it's human enough that it could be considered form of murder. And that's why the only time murder is permissible is when you want to save another person. Otherwise, murder is prohibited. And if someone asks you to murder someone else, otherwise they'll kill you, you have to let yourself be killed and not violate. It's one of the three cardinal principles that you're not allowed to do. So what do we see from here? What we see over here is that they have not only a slightly different opinion, but it can be a major different opinion. And we will soon see how it actually comes out in Jewish law. So both of them maintain that abortion is a very serious prohibition, and it's not allowed under regular circumstances. However, they have different ideas of when it's permissible or not. Now, one of the most trying issues of abortion is if we know that the fetus was hit with a genetic disease. One of the diseases that Ashkenazi Jews have always been worried about was the Tay-Sachs disease. By the way, you know where the name Tay-Sachs comes from. It was a British ophthalmologist that noticed this disease, and he was able to find a red spot on the eye. And then a Dr. Bernard Sachs in the United States was able to do genetic sequencing, and therefore it's called Tay-Sachs after these two doctors. There's no chance of survival in Tay-Sachs. There could be a little bit of an extension of life, but basically the nerve system shuts down, the baby goes blind and deaf, and then eventually dies. And it's very, very difficult. Now, I have to say that there are articles written, how did the Ashkenazi Jew wipe out Tay-Sachs? It's almost unheard of today, Tay-Sachs. And that is because of genetic screening. One of the things that's very interesting, I know of it in the Orthodox Jewish community, but I'm sure it's everywhere, that a couple does not announce and does not date, forget about announcing an engagement, before they get screened. There is an organization in New York called Dor Yesharim. Dor means the generation of fairness, and they have a lab and they do testing. It's not only in New York, it's all over the world. They have these labs where they do genetic testing and they do to see if it's a match. What's interesting is they never reveal what the person has or who's the one that has it. But they're able to figure some diseases, if one person has the genetic disorder, they don't recommend it. In some cases, it has to be both people are carriers. And it is so common. Now, this is a prerequisite. We do not let our children date until they do the screening. The screening is done very discreetly. They go in for a blood test, and there's a whole panel of tests. And within a few days, they have all the results. You get an ID number. You call in. They do a check to see if you're the right person. There's a whole system of safeties and checks and securities to know that they're speaking to the right person with the codes and the phone number and all of that. And then you read them the number and they'll tell you yay or nay. It has happened, and I've seen it several times. Call in and they say, sorry, we feel very bad, but it's not a match. And it's immediately dropped. That's how they eliminated Tay-Sachs. But nevertheless, it was a question. So what happens if parents did not go through the screening? And unfortunately, they discover during the pregnancy that the child is afflicted with Tay-Sachs, and they want to have an abortion. And this is a question that has come to rabbis. Now, I don't know what they did it, but text number 7 is an answer to text number 8. But since they put 7 first, we'll go 7 and then we'll go 8. Page 107, this is Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. Moshe Feinstein, you remember from last week, that he was a little bit more lenient when it came to end-of-life issues. He said you don't have to cross out the DNR, you can allow it. No, you can allow the DNR and the DNI. You don't have to run intervention, especially if there's risk, okay? But let's see what he says here. Over here, he's just the opposite. He takes a very stringent opinion. He says, abortion is forbidden as an act of murder. The only distinction between abortion and the murder of an already born human is that one is not liable to receive the death penalty for killing a fetus. The only instance in which abortion could be permitted is when it's necessary in order to save the life of the fetus's mother. He takes Maimonides' viewpoint. This applies even to a fetus that the doctors predict will only be able to survive for a few years, such as children born with Tay-Sachs disease. Even if the diagnostic tests that have recently been developed determine that the child will be born with this disease, it is forbidden to abort. Although will cause great pain to the parents, nevertheless, since the mother's life is not endangered by the fetus, abortion cannot be permitted. We must acknowledge that God is directly in charge of all events, and we need to accept everything that God does with love. So Rabbi Feinstein's opinion is Tay-Sachs abortion may not be permitted. Abortion is equivalent to murder, and he takes the stand of Maimonides that the only time murder is permitted is when it comes to save the mother's life. But if we look at Rashi, Rashi doesn't mention this whole thing about murder and rodef. He mentions the opposite, that it's not a full life. So perhaps if we know that the mother is going to suffer emotional distress, perhaps there could be a different viewpoint. Let's give a look at Rabbi Waldenberg. Text 8, page 108. Rabbi Waldenberg says, you inquired about the permissibility of abortion in a case of Tay-Sachs disease, which can be diagnosed during pregnancy. The consequence of this disease is extremely severe and untreatable. And you asked whether this constitutes sufficient grounds to permit an abortion. After carefully considering all aspects of this issue, my conclusion is that in this unique case, where the consequences of continuing the pregnancy and bringing the child to term is so severe, it is possible to permit an abortion before the fetus reaches 7 months. I will soon go to the 7 months. I base this conclusion on the lengthy halachic analysis of the statute of abortion that I published in Sit Eliezer 9, Chapter 951, which presents the conclusion that abortion does not constitute an act of murder, because he goes according to Rashi. After 7 months, abortion is far weightier decision because at that stage, the fetus typically attains a state of viability. Now, before I talk about that, let's see a few things here. Number one, Tay-Sachs abortion may be permitted. Abortion is typically forbidden, but it's not a form of murder. So he follows Rashi's interpretation. So there's a lot of things that we learn from here, but before we go to what I want to learn out from this, no question that they both rabbis know that abortion is not permitted at will. But they also know that it's not a total human being. The question is if it's considered to be a form of murder or it's not a form of murder. Another thing that I want to mention is that let's say the mother is in a fragile state of mind, and giving birth to this kind of child or any kind of deformity is going to cause stress, where she might even be affected with suicidal thoughts, then even Rabbi Feinstein would agree to allow for an abortion, because that already goes to the very deep health of the mother. Because even though it is equivalent to murder, but over there it's already endangering the life of the mother. So that's why what I want to say is none of these cases are black and white or crystal clear. In every situation, it is absolutely necessary to discuss it with the medical professional and the rabbi as a team, and to go through all the details and see all the scenarios, how this goes. Now, another thing about the 7 months, the 7 months is more of an emotional conclusion. It's not a halachic conclusion. Because nowhere in the Torah does it make a distinction between 6 months and 7 months. But 7 months, the only distinction is that 7 months, the baby, if they're born, they can already be viable. So therefore, his heart didn't allow that they should do it in that case. But halachically, the only place that we see a difference is the 40-day clause, which we're going to get to soon. But there's another major observation that I want to make here, and this is essential to what we're studying here. The major observation is when you hear about courts, and lawyers can attest to this, when a case is brought before a judge, the client will always come to the lawyer and say, what's the history of this judge? How do they rule? Are they lenient? Are they more strict? How do they usually rule? And the lawyer says, okay, I did a case. I've been with this judge many times. This judge usually is a lenient judge and is okay. Or this judge is a very rigid judge. Because it's consistent. If they're rigid in one area, they're going to be rigid in another area. Yet here we find a contrast between what we studied last week to what we studied this week. In last week's discussion, there was the question about the end of life. Do you need to take heroic action, even if there's not a major risk, in order to prolong life or not? Rabbi Waldenberg said absolutely yes. You can't allow the person to die, and you have to do everything you can. And it has to be you can't have a DNR and all of that. Rabbi Feinstein said no. There's no value to the life, so you're not allowed to kill the person. You're not allowed to deny oxygen and water. But you don't have to go and do procedures or other things in order to prolong their life. So DNR is fine. So you would say, okay, Rabbi Feinstein is the lenient rabbi, and Rabbi Waldenberg is the strict rabbi. Comes to this week's class, and it's totally reversed. Rabbi Waldenberg says, yeah, same-sex abortion is fine. I don't look at as abortion as murder. It's admitted, but it's not considered murder. Rabbi Feinstein says, no, it's murder, but it's not murder that requires the death penalty. So what does it mean? They're not coming from a slanted viewpoint. They're not coming from something, oh, this resonates more with me, or I have a leaning towards this direction. Absolutely not. They're coming from the perspective of what do they believe the Torah is saying. That's their only consideration. What does the Torah say? Rabbi Feinstein in this case says that the Rambam came after Rashi, and Rambam was the accepted decider, and I'm going to go with the Rambam. And many rabbis go with that. Rabbi Waldenberg says, yes, but Rashi is, the most accepted commentator of the interpretation of the Torah, even though he's not known as someone that gives law. But there's a reason why I should go with him. So they're not going with what feels good or what doesn't feel good. That's not their consideration. And that's why the argument of choice when it comes to abortion doesn't exist in Judaism. The word choice doesn't exist. It's not about the mother's choice or the father's choice. It's about what does the Torah say? Is this permissible or not permissible? The only place we find the choice is in the case that we saw in the video, which we're going to get to soon. So the argument that you have that it's choice versus life doesn't exist in Judaism. Even though it's part of the woman's body, but the woman doesn't have the right to destroy part of her body. Do you know that in Judaism, which is different than secular law, in secular law, if somebody decides that the new way of fingers should be 4 fingers and a hand and not 5, they are permitted to go to a cosmetic surgeon and ask the cosmetic surgeon, what's the price for amputating a finger? There's no danger. I just like the look. Now, I don't know if the doctor will feel comfortable. He might try to dissuade, but they'll do it. The same thing is with tattoos. There are two artists there. What does Judaism say? Absolutely not. The body is not yours. It belongs to God. Life is not yours. It belongs to God. You don't have the right to violate God's body. And you don't have the right, it's not about your choice. So the same thing is true about abortion. Yeah, it is part of the woman's body. It's not yet formed as its own life. But you don't have the right over it. It's God created you, and God is in charge. And that's the way we look at it from halacha. So therefore, the whole word that this is the pro-choice versus pro-life doesn't exist in Judaism. It's one word, pro-Torah. What does Torah say? Now, you can sometimes find different opinions, as you find right here, that there are different opinions, and that's fine. Because they both have something to hang on to, because the Torah itself gives the options. And I want to say one other thing before we go to the next case. A lot of people are very confused when it comes to law, because law is black and white. This is the law, and don't give me any other story. But anyone that knows law, and especially lawyers, know that you always look at precedent. And you can sometimes argue a case based on precedent, that there are extenuating circumstances. Now, the way it works in Judaism is the extenuating circumstances can only be applied if Torah itself indicates that there's an allowance for that. If the Torah doesn't indicate that there's an allowance for extenuating circumstances, then it doesn't fly. How does the Torah do that? By giving you these bizarre cases, like we saw here, the two men are having a quarrel, and one of them hits the woman, and then you see what the law is, that even if the babies are killed, there's only a monetary fine. Yes.
Can't the woman in some ways possibly manipulate the answer in terms of if she knows both ways, of the ways the rabbis think, and she knows the one is more lenient than the other, and she chooses to go to the one who's more lenient, then she's got to follow that rabbi's ruling.
So here, let me repeat the question, because based on what we just said, it answers your question. This answers the question in a brilliant way. Let me explain what I mean, and let me say the question. The woman can decide, okay, I know that there's two different schools of thought. Let me go to the one that's going to be lenient, and I'll do that. So the truth of the matter is that according to halacha, you cannot go rabbi shopping. You can't. Generally, when you accept a rabbi, that's the rabbi that gives you the ruling, you go according to that rabbi. Over here, you find that if you're going to go to Rabbi Waldenberg, in some cases he'll be lenient, in some cases he'll be stricter. And that's your lot. If you go to Rabbi Feinstein, you'll find that in some cases he'll be strict, in some cases he'll be lenient. Now, all I'm saying here is that you're not going to go to Rabbi Feinstein and Rabbi Waldenberg because they're both not alive. But you're going to go to a rabbi, and the rabbi sometimes has to judge the case, and he says, I need to find a leniency here because I see the woman is truly distraught. Even though she didn't say that she's going to commit suicide, but I know that it's going to be a tremendous burden on her, and it's going to cause her to be in ultimate depression. So he has the leeway to say, okay, in this case, I'm going to go with Rabbi Waldenberg, because he has what to base it on. And this is generally in halacha. There's a very famous story with the Baal Shem Tov, that he once came to a feast of a Brit Milah, and the main menu at the meal was duck. There are kosher ducks. It's very rare, but there are. And they found a question that there was a breakage in one of the bones, that the question was whether the duck is kosher or not. And it was in a rabbi's house. And the first reaction, as soon as the rabbi saw it, he said, to me, it looks like it's not kosher. He didn't give the verdict, but he said, it looks like it's not kosher. The Baal Shem Tov called the rabbi. 1 second, let me finish. The Baal Shem Tov called the rabbi aside, and he says, do whatever you can, and let's look together through all of the books in your library. Perhaps we can find an opinion that says that in this case it is kosher, because it wasn't that the heart was punctured, it wasn't that there was a vital organ, but it could be that it was close to a vital organ. There's different ways of looking at it. And the rabbi respected the Baal Shem Tov, and they spent an hour until they found responsa, where there's a very famous rabbi that gives an exact case like that and says that it is kosher, and especially if it comes to the feast of a mitzvah, and it's fine. The Baal Shem Tov was very pleased, and people think of Baal Shem Tov. He had no connection to food. Food was the furthest thing from his mind. And why is he so interested in the duck? So later, when he was back in his synagogue, so some of his students came over to him and said, why were you so adamant? So he says, this duck soul is a reincarnated duck soul. So you speak about reincarnation. What happened was that a year or two ago, a woman came in with a similar question on a duck. And it was Friday afternoon. The rabbi was busy. He didn't have time. So he gave a look, and his first impression was that it's not kosher. Said to the woman, not kosher. Go get it. Go get yourself another duck. And she threw out the duck. The soul of the duck came to heaven with a complaint and said, I was to be consumed for Shabbat, to be a mitzvah, and I was denied that. But I was denied that without any due diligence, and the rabbi is wrong. And I want the rabbi to come up to court and face me, which means the rabbi would die and he would have to go up to the heavenly court. So they made a decision in heaven that they'll give the rabbi one more chance, that he shouldn't be dismissive and do the due diligence. And if he does the due diligence, then everything will be settled. The Baal Shem Tov came to the bris and he said, I saw it. And therefore I had pity on this rabbi. I didn't want him to die. And he, by nature, was going to be dismissive again. That's not kosher. And I said, look and do the due diligence, until he found the due diligence that there's something to hang your hat on to say that it is fine. So you have to understand, you want to issue a ruling, you can't go to Google and go in the Hebrew Google and start looking at all the responsa and give just like you don't go to a doctor for a diagnosis and you say, I'm going to get the diagnosis on one of the medical sites. And then I know that, because every circumstance, every situation is different. Everything is unique. And when a question comes before a rabbi, God is there to give him the inspiration of how to give the verdict. So we have to understand that. Now, when someone is coming with a question, there shouldn't be any preconceived notions, not by the rabbi and not by the person asking the question. When you ask the question from the rabbi that's giving the halacha, you have to say, I want to know what's the right thing to do. These are the circumstances. This is why it's so difficult. And the rabbi cannot come with preconceived notions and has to say, this is what the halacha is through the research. And that's what we learned from here. And abortion, being that it's a very sensitive issue, actually highlights that. We have to answer the original question. But before that, I just want to mention one more thing. It's an optional piece, but it's still good. It's called the 40-day clause. The 40-day clause is an interesting thing that most rabbis, even Rabbi Feinstein, would be lenient in regards to abortion if it's in the first 40 days. And how do we know that? Let me give you a little introduction. The introduction is like this. Jews living in Israel in the time of the Beit HaMikdash, even today, but especially in the time of the Beit HaMikdash, had to give certain kind of tithings. The first one wasn't a tithing, it was called truma. And the second was tithing. The truma was to take off from the grain and give it to the Kohen. That grain that they separated for the Kohen became holy, that a non-Kohen was not permitted to consume it. The Torah clearly says that if somebody consumes, someone that's not supposed to consume the truma consumes it, they will die a heavenly death because they violated and they desecrated the truma by eating it. So it could be the most righteous person, but if they're not a Kohen, they cannot eat it. What happens if a woman is a non-Kohen and she marries a Kohen? So it says that since she married a Kohen, she's permitted to enjoy it, the truma. What happens if the Kohen dies? So there's a big difference. The difference is if she has children. Now I'm going to switch it around because the question is really by a woman, the opposite. Let's say there's a daughter of a Kohen. The daughter of a Kohen is allowed to eat truma because she's in the family. Every child in the Kohen family can eat truma. What happens if she gets married to a non-Kohen, to an Israelite? Then she can't eat truma anymore. What happens if her husband dies? The question is if she had any children from him. If she has children, then since her children are Israelites, so that disqualifies her from having truma. If she had no children, then she can't eat it. What happens if she's pregnant? If she's pregnant, it's considered as if she has children, except if it's the first 40 days. Let's give a look what it is. Text 9, 110. If the daughter of a Kohen married a non-Kohen and he died on the wedding night, the reason we're saying on the wedding night is that we don't know if she's pregnant. We do know that they had relations on the wedding night. We don't know if she became pregnant through that. She may immerse in the mikveh. The mikveh we're talking about is not for family purity. The mikveh here is that you couldn't eat truma unless you went to the mikveh first. And in fact, in the first tractate of the Mishnah, it says, when do you know to start eating? When do you know to read the Shema? From the time that the Kohanim went to the mikveh and they eat the truma. So to eat the truma, they had to purify themselves. So she can go and immerse herself in the mikveh, and then she can eat truma evening. So the Gemara asks, why are we not concerned that she may be pregnant? Because if she's pregnant, then she cannot eat the truma, right? That's what we said before. Rav Chisda said she may eat the truma until 40 days from her marriage, because if she's not pregnant, there's no disqualifying factor. If she is pregnant, until 40 days have elapsed, the embryo is mere fluid. What?
When was this opinion rendered?
In the time of the Talmud. This is going back between 1600 to 2000 years ago, before Rambam and before Rashi. So it's considered to be fluid. There are other laws as well in regards to that a dead body causes impurity, but if a fetus was aborted or miscarried in the first 40 days, it's not considered to be unclean. We're not going to go into the scientific part of it, because in the scientific part, there is a whole discussion about 6 weeks or 8 weeks. This is 40 days, 10 weeks. That's the point. Now, this is not in the writings that we have here. There was a very famous rabbi in Jerusalem, also one of the greatest deciders of halacha. He said this applies to abortion as well. Rabbi Feinstein was a little harsher, but Rabbi Auerbach said that if there's a case of Tay-Sachs or there's a case with other genetic, if it's the 40 days, you don't have to think about it. Rabbi Feinstein wasn't so careful, but in some cases he actually did agree, because the Gemara does say that. So we see that there is all these issues. Now we're going to go to the question that we asked in the beginning from the film of Shtisel. And what was the question? The question was, the woman became pregnant. And by the way, according to the script of that film, they recommended she shouldn't, and she did. And then she had this lung problem, as we learned, right? The hypertension of the artery and the pulmonary in the lungs. And the doctor said that this is a clear and present danger if she continues with her pregnancy, and she refused. So this question came up actually without this disease, but a different kind of disease, to Rabbi Sternbach. Rav Moshe Sternbach is still alive. He is a very famous halachic authority. You can read his bio on the side. Text 111. When the doctors are not clear about the degree of danger the pregnancy poses to the mother, and the risk appears to be at level of 50% or less, we rule that abortion is allowed. So if it's 50% or less risk, so the abortion is not mandatory, it's allowed. However, if the mother insists that she does not want to proceed with an abortion, and instead wishes to rely on God's mercy and kindness, we cannot stand in her way. She may choose such an approach, for there's room to argue that Maimonides would only permit abortion when a fetus is clearly erodive that threatens the mother's life. Although we do not follow that position, nevertheless, if a mother insists on acting in accordance with this position, we cannot prevent her. She may choose to rely on God's mercy and kindness. So what does he say? It could work either way. Even though abortion is recommended, because it could be a danger to the mother, but since it's not a clear danger because it's 50% or less, if the mother insists that she wants to go through with a pregnancy, then it's fine. What happens if it's like the case that we just saw on the TV show? By contrast, when the doctors state that the danger is clear, the doctor said in Hebrew, Chad mashma'i, there's no doubt that this is going to be a danger, although according to the script he was wrong, but that's all fiction. And the mother's chances of survival are minimal. Is it then forbidden for the mother to choose to be lenient about her own life and place herself in such serious dangers? In such a scenario, we unequivocally instruct her that she is halachically obligated to undergo an abortion so that she may not endanger herself. In other words, there's a rule against suicide, there's a rule against doing danger to oneself, and by her continuing with the pregnancy, she has to do it. So in the first case, we see that this is the way rabbis will do it. You can hang on to either opinion. So therefore, we could be lenient and whatever she wants. In this case, lenient is she doesn't want the abortion, she wants to take the risk, we're okay. But in a case where there is definite risk, the rabbis have to come down very, very strong. This is a very interesting. Now, the movie doesn't go with that. The movie cuts off and says that they asked the rabbi. I mentioned before that the idea of abortion is not based on our choice. And this is found on this slide as well. The Jewish approach to abortion is based on an obligation to the sanctity of life, not on the premise of a right to choose. We have to look at what the Torah says. We also have to remember, in the olden days, the concept of abortion was so foreign, even amongst non-Jews. It didn't become an issue until later years. Why was it even an issue amongst non-Jews? By non-Jews and the world in general, children were an asset. People lived on farms. They needed to have helping hands, farm help. And when you look in the farming community, especially here in the South, people had very large families. So it just wasn't the Hasidim that had large families or the Orthodox. People had very large families. And why they have large families? Because when they had all these children, they were able to tend to all of the needs on the farm. Not only that, the school schedule in the South was based on farm. That's why schools would end in May or the beginning of June, because that was the time of the harvest and people had to work in the farm. And then by August, they were back in school. So having children was a necessity and people were willing to take the risk. In Judaism, it was never about creating slaves. In Judaism, it was more about the preciousness of life. And the preciousness of life is what it drives it. So the taking of a life is considered to be something which is very, very serious. What happens in a case where a mother cannot handle it? So in a lot of communities, they have organizations that help, and they'll sometimes adopt. There's a foundation called the Ohel Foundation in New York that they take these children. Some of the children are Down syndrome children, some of the children with special needs. They either get them adopted by families that want them, or they take it, they have them living in their facilities, but it's a very, very big deal. Now, in Chabad, when the Rebbe was with us in the physical sense, and these kind of situations would come up, invariably, they would turn to the Rebbe and ask the Rebbe in an emergency, this is the condition, what do we do? Sometimes the Rebbe say, go to a proper Rav, proper rabbi that knows the law and go according to him. In some cases, the Rebbe said, don't intervene, everything will be fine. I promise everything will be fine. And then things were fine. I know of several cases where there were genetic tests done, and the test came with a very strong possibility of negativity, and the Rebbe said, please ignore it. The children were fine. But over there, it's an above natural power, because a tzaddik has the ability to infuse life and to avoid that the dangerous situation should happen. So they were asking the Rebbe not from a halachic perspective, that they were asking the Rebbe from a miraculous or spiritual perspective to be able to get the blessing so that they shouldn't have to deal with that. Yes.
Can I share a quick story?
You want to share?
Yeah,
Why don't you come here so that everybody can see you on the screen?
it's fine. So basically, my great grandma, she was pregnant and.
Come closer
with
so they
another
should hear.
child. And then, so
Start again. Your great grandma.
she was pregnant with her youngest child, and the doctors recommended that she get an abortion, and she went to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe told her not to. And she gave birth to a healthy child, but as she was giving birth, she pushed out, I think, a ovarian cancer, which they would not have realized, and it like also like saved
Saved
her
her
life
life.
by not doing that. So I just like to share that.
Thank you very much. But there are many, many stories about that with the Rebbe, but the Rebbe was able to work in higher worlds. We've seen that all the time. And it was very, very interesting because if the Rebbe didn't answer, or the Rebbe would say, may there be good tidings, you usually knew that the situation is not. But if the Rebbe gave very clear instructions, said do this or do that, you knew that it's going to be fine. There are videos that they have available now from testimonies of people that have actually experienced that. But you don't go to a rabbi for a miracle. You go to a Rebbe for a miracle. You go to a rabbi, you need to know what the halachic decision is and how to follow the halacha. There are a lot of cases in medical things when they went to the Rebbe. There's a rabbi in California, the head of Chabad in California, Rabbi Kunin. And I remember that in the very early 80s, he became very ill. And he had a particular illness. I don't know what it was, but they found it on x-rays and the prognosis wasn't good. I don't know what it was. And he called my father and he said he made all the arrangements for the transition and he should not tell the Rebbe. My father decided not to obey him. And the next time my father was by the Rebbe, he said he just had a call from Rabbi Kunin, and Rabbi Kunin gave him this news. The Rebbe thought, and he said like this, is garnished. It's nothing. My father called up Rabbi Kunin and he said, I violated your trust. And I told the Rebbe the story. He started to scream, but he said, the Rebbe said it's nothing. And I recommend that you should go for new tests. Went for new tests and it was nothing. He's still around with us. So the point is, there's things that we don't understand, but that's not the way you go with halacha. When you go with Jewish law, you have to go according to understanding what does the Torah say and how do we deal with it. And abortion is one of those cases. Now you'll understand why when I was called by the radio station and they were saying, okay, Rabbi, we finally have a Jewish leader who's going to explain to us why abortion is murder. Rabbi, do you consider abortion murder? I said, it's not so simple. It depends, because when he heard that, he says, we're going to a commercial break. And then he says, Rabbi, I was misled. I said, you never talked to me. So why are you saying that you were misled? So in any case, the point of the matter is, it's not as black and white. It's not as simple. Even Rabbi Feinstein, who says it's murder, doesn't compare it with the murder of where you have a death penalty. And there are certain circumstances where it's permissible. According to Rashi, it's definitely not considered to be murder. But what is common with everybody is that to have abortion at leisure, or to have abortion because it's inconvenient, or one is not ready to have a baby, or they don't have a crib for them, or whatever the reason is, that is absolutely prohibited in Judaism.
Even within the first 40 days.
Even in the first 40 days. The first 40 days, if there's a disease that they can detect, if they can detect it, or the woman is in tremendous emotional distress, so they're more lenient in the first 40 days. But even in the first 40 days, it's prohibited to have an abortion at will, because that's the concept that I said before, wasting seed or wasting the potential life is considered to be something which is very, very serious. There's this whole question about rape. And that's why I'm saying that in cases like that, where it causes tremendous emotional distress, and it's in the first 40 days, the abortion is permissible. Because it's in the first 40 days. That's where it's usually applied, is in a case of rape.
I think incest.
Incest is the same thing. Yeah, same concept. This is something which is unfortunate, but nevertheless, it's an issue. Next week, we're going to be talking about the dignity and the sanctity of the human body. One of the big controversies is about autopsies, cremation. We're going to talk about the sanctity of the body and why burial in a cemetery, in a Jewish cemetery, is considered to be a sanctified act and all the halachic implications. So stay tuned. Thank you very much for joining us. But I want to end the meeting. I have to know how to do it. First, we'll stop recording.
Thank you.
Stop.